Unfortunately, we were not able to visit the Korean War Memorial, but we do plan on visiting that on our next trip to DC, hopefully this fall. And I highly recommend, if you have a trip to DC coming up, you visit that. It is in the National Mall near the Lincoln Memorial. Okay, hello everyone. APUSH on the Road is back in Washington, D.C. And we're at probably one of the most hallowed sites here, and that's the Vietnam Memorial. And this is a wall of names, 58,000 names roughly, of the men and women who died in one of the most controversial wars in American history. And this wall was dedicated in the early 1980s, and it's on black granite. And I do think it's apropos that this wall was dedicated in the early 1980s, because that's when America started talking about Vietnam and the controversies of Vietnam. PBS came out with a documentary, Vietnam on TV, I believe it was called, in the early 1980s. And, we've discussed in class, and I'm not getting too close because I don't want to, just out of respect to the people that are finding loved ones and comrades that perished during the war, out of respect for them, I'm not going to film and talk over why they're trying to find names of people that they lost. So I'm going to stand back here. But I lost my train of thought. I apologize. But we see here that in the 1980s that Americans started talking about the war. You saw pop culture beginning with we talked about in class with Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA came out in 1984. We saw all of the Oliver Stone movies coming out in 1986 with Platoon. Born on the 4th of July came out in 1989. We read the book Born on the 4th of July. That was the basis of the Oliver Stone picture, which came out in the late 70s, but really came to prominence in the 1980s. And I also want to pan over to here of this just absolutely beautiful sculpture statue. Faces of Honor, this is called. And I want to give a shout out to Liam Alcott. He sent me a picture when he was in Washington a couple weeks ago. Sent me a picture on Instagram of him of this, and I thought it was absolutely amazing. And what we see here is we see three soldiers. We see the Latin American soldier holding an M60. We see the white soldier, and we see the African American soldier. Again, this war was fought by all different races. White, black, Latin American, didn't matter. And if you notice that where this statue is being situated, they're looking out, and they're the survivors. They're looking out at the fallen, the 58,000 that perished in the war. Such a beautiful piece of art. You see the M16 being held by this soldier. But, when you think about these men together, black, white, Latin American, they had all one goal in mind: to get out of this place. We got to get out of this place. That's what they were thinking. And, the country at home, while they were in Vietnam in the jungle, slugging it out against the communists, people at home were fighting a different war. They were fighting a war against civil rights. They were fighting a war against the war in Vietnam. They were fighting political upheaval. They were fighting economic inequalities that were happening. So, Billy Joel said it in the song Goodnight Saigon. They had no home front. So while these men were fighting this war overseas, what they came home to was also another war being fought, and they didn't get the support that they deserved. And we see these people here. We see this person here touching the wall. I can't zoom in close enough, but who knows? It could have been somebody he knew, kneeling down. Could have been a loved one, could have been a friend, who knows? So I just think this is, me and teaching the war in Vietnam how important this is in our country's history, and how important it is that we study this and study the perspectives of this, of all the men and women that died fighting for our freedom, you know, and they were fighting for this war under the context of, you know, we're context guys here at APUSH, you know, fighting under the context of containment to stop Vietnam, specifically South Vietnam, from falling to the communists. And this wall is dating back, dates back to the Eisenhower administration. The first names on this wall would date back to 1955. Would be the first casualties under the Eisenhower administration when he first sent advisors in. So you're talking about a year after the fall of Dien Bien Phu, after the French left Vietnam and Americans sent advisors in, and this became, once Americans started sending advisors, and it's not till really 1964, and then 1965 you see the Americanization of the war, Operation Rolling Thunder. The Americanization is when we truly get involved, and the last names on this wall go up to 1975, so you're talking 20 years. So the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. Okay, folks, we are back here, and we're still at the Vietnam Memorial, but we're actually at the Vietnam Women's Memorial. Now, when we think of the Vietnam War, I know a lot of us think of it just being a lot of men, and but there's actually a lot of women that also, unfortunately, perished during the war, but also a lot of women took part in the war. And again, like what we see here with war, well, we also have a 1993.
This is Charity holding the soldier. She's trying to stop him from bleeding.
Nurses.
Next to her, she's looking up to the sky for a medevac.
Dust off chopper.
Side on her knees praying. And Miss Goodacre says this soldier does survive as well. Says he makes it. Now these 8 trees that surround the memorial, these are not just for decoration. These are 8 yellowwood trees. But there are 8 women that are on the wall as well. So we do have 8 women.
8 women on the Vietnam Memorial wall.
Right. So make sure you got your picture if you haven't got one. Straight up this way.
Now, besides women taking part in the war, like in all wars, women take tremendous role in the war. We also see women as obviously nurses during the war. We see women taking part as journalists during the war. And Vietnam, as we're going to see, taking a drastic change from World War II, and then another drastic change in the Persian Gulf War in the early 1990s. Vietnam actually was an open journalism war, and it was basically free range for the journalists, and there was a lot of female journalists in the war. But this statue is depicting women nurses. And these 8 trees that are surrounding this statue are depicting the 8 women that are on the wall. So just another fantastic piece as part of the Vietnam Memorial and what our National Park Service has to offer us here in the nation's capital. Next. All right, folks, here we are, the World War II Memorial, dedicated in 2004 under the George W. Bush administration. Wow, what a view of the Lincoln Memorial there. There's the fam, the kids waiting. It's hot here in D.C., again, I said. Now, this is a very interesting memorial, the way it's designed. What you have here is you have pillars. You have 48 states being represented. That's right, I said 48. Remember, it's the World War II Memorial. So what we see here is that there's 48 states represented, plus you have 2 territories, Alaska and Hawaii, being represented. You also have 2 larger pillars. To the south, you have the Pacific Pillar, and to the north, you have the Atlantic Pillar. Okay, each of these pillars are representing the 2 theaters of the war. This engraving is showing women who stepped up, were measured as citizens of the nation, not as women. This was a people's war, not everyone, this was a people's war, and everyone was in it. Remember, this is total war. Everybody took part in this war. And what we see here is that this war had a massive home front where everybody took a major role in this war. We have a quote here from FDR, who was president, who presided during this war until he passed away in 1945, and then Truman took over. And then let's take a look at the Atlantic side of things. And we're going to see how this commemorates the different parts of the Atlantic campaign. With major battles, we see D-Day, June 6, 44, Battle of the Bulge, different regions of Europe that were part of it, beautiful fountains. Battle of Anzio, this is where my grandpa on my dad's side fought as a tank commander. He was a tank destroyer. There we go, General George C. Marshall. Another view of the fountains. I was telling my kids that when we were at the Vietnam Memorial, that was their grandparents' generation. And now as we're sitting here in the World War II Memorial, I was telling them that this is my grandparents' generation, their great-grandparents' generation, that all took part in this. Here we have Harry Truman. Again, the Lincoln Memorial. And let's check out the Pacific side of things. Now this memorial did come with some controversy as the placement of it. It's right in the middle of the National Mall, and as you can see here, you are seeing the Washington Monument. Let me zoom out. Okay, you are seeing the National Washington Monument, and it does obstruct the view, as some thought, of the view from the Lincoln Memorial to the Washington Monument. I personally think it's an absolutely beautiful memorial, but I'm also a World War II guy and just love everything about this. I told my kids, for me, this is Disney World coming down here to our nation's capital. All right, so now let's see here, the Pacific Pillar, the Pacific War. This is where my other grandfather fought. He was actually in both theaters. He was in the Navy. That's where we read his journal in our lesson. But see here, we see The War's End, quote by Douglas MacArthur. Today, the guns are silent. A great tragedy has ended. A great victory has been won. The skies no longer rain death. The seas bear only commerce. Men everywhere walk upright in the sunlight. The entire world is quiet at peace. And again, like the side of the European theater, we see the North Pacific, Central Pacific, Southwest Pacific, major battles, Tarawa, New Guinea, Guadalcanal, and hopefully we're going to see a major achievement of Guadalcanal in a little bit later. The Battle of Midway, what was considered the turning point of the war in the Pacific. So just an absolutely great memorial showing the war that truly redefined America's placement in the war, in the world. America, we talk about revolutions and revolutionary presidents, and we see in the backdrop there of the Lincoln Memorial, I'm not going to zoom in again, but how Lincoln was a revolutionary president. And we see the Washington Monument, how Washington was a revolutionary president. And we see FDR, we've talked about how FDR was a revolutionary president, meaning that America changed as a result of their presidency and has never gone back. World War II itself was a revolutionary event in world policy for the United States. America will never go back. America comes out of this war as a superpower and never goes back into taking a back seat of foreign affairs. And this is a dedication memorial to the men and women that gave their lives and gave their all for the price of victory.